I'm Dr. Pamela Peeke. I'm Assistant Professor of Medicine at the University of Maryland, School of Medicine. I'm the author of The Hunger Fix and an expert in nutrition, metabolism, and fitness.
Can you tell me a little bit about the book?
The Hunger Fix is the first consumer book describing the brand new science of food and addiction, why we have this issue, why this is a brand new issue that must be addressed with a plan and a strategy for people who are suffering with food addiction.
And how did you come to this kind of work?
I am a Pew Foundation scholar in nutrition and metabolism. I have always been interested in all things nutrition. For many, many years, I listened to my patients who would oftentimes sound like a little junkie. I need a fix. I need some more of this. I need a hit. Withdrawal is hell. And they were referring to food, mostly the hyperpalatables, the sugary, fatty, salty foods, mostly refined and processed. As experts, we thought there was something going on. Now, we have brand new science that begins to really clearly explain why there's an association between these kinds of foods and truly addictive behaviors. These are the same kinds of behaviors that hold people back from progress when they're trying to take good care of themselves. Many of these behaviors are associated with shame, blame, and guilt, and they're oftentimes hidden. So people, especially coaches, have to be very creative and aware and enlightened about this whole condition of food addiction so they can draw it out as they're trying to help someone progress and improve their own health and well-being.
If I'm understanding correctly, the piece that's so new about this is to use the frame of addiction and to use all of the information that's been available for a long time about addiction, but to apply it to this new area. Did I get that right?
If you use the classic template of addiction, then it turns out these hyperpalatable, sugary, fatty, salty foods fall within the bailiwick of the same paradigm. We never knew this before. This means that in your brain, we now use neuroimaging techniques, PET scans, functional MRIs, to be able to peer into what used to be a black box. We now see that there are two parts of the brain, the reward center, as well as the center for executive function, which is the prefrontal cortex. Both of these are affected. The prefrontal cortex is actually impaired and even damaged, reversible. The reward center goes through its own organic changes, a downregulation of the very receptors that dopamine, the pleasure neurotransmitter of the brain, needs to connect with. So over time, people can be hooked on all kinds of self-destructive behaviors. It could be watching television hour after hour. It could be that iPhone or that iPad or that fill in the blank, some screen out there. It could be any kind of behavior that begins to demonstrate addictive traits. You're building and building on a very powerful platform of a vicious cycle. You're socially withdrawing. You're finding that you're not keeping up with social obligations and work site obligations, for instance. You're breaking relationships. You're harming relationships. It just keeps going on and on. There's a new category, by the way, of addiction per se, and that is almost addicted. This is actually a much larger group of people. These are people on the launch pad for true addiction. People who have already demonstrated behaviors that are not meeting criteria exactly for addiction, but they're working on it. And again, this could be anything from video game playing for hour after hour after hour and not taking care of yourself or your life obligations, to the hyperpalatable foods that you consistently eat 24/7.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the treatment that you're devising and what's coming forward from your research?
Most research now shows that an excellent strategy for dealing with someone who has an issue with food and addiction is an integrated. Most research now shows that an integrative strategy is the best one to be able to address food and addiction. What does that mean? It means you're individualizing and customizing, because you see, sheer abstinence alone is impossible with food. There are certain food-like substances, and these are mostly the refined and processed foods, that you can avoid in life. I mean, there is life without having half of this stuff. However, sugar is ubiquitous. It's even in ketchup. A little hard to say that you're abstinent of it 100%. Not so much for drugs and alcohol. That's much easier. With foods, you're cued constantly, 24/7. So, what's the strategy look like? The strategy is something I love to call mind, mouth, and muscle. It's an integrative strategy. When you start with the mind, one of the most powerful things you can do, and it's fundamental to the strategy, is to strengthen the prefrontal cortex. You must be able to stay in the moment, be mindful, vigilant, pay attention, in order to rein in the 3 I's that tend to show up if you're not: impulsivity, impatience, and irritability. So how can you beef up this prefrontal cortex? Well, gosh, first of all, meditation is very powerful. Any kind of meditation, so long as you're really practicing a mindfulness base, it works. This way you're checking in with yourself. This way you don't get ahead of yourself. Any strategy, therefore, that also helps you with stress resilience. One of the hallmarks of any kind of addictive behavior per se is the inability to adapt and adjust to life stresses without knee-jerking into self-destruction. So the toolbox has to be filled with more tools to help you with stress resilience. The next piece of this is obviously looking at the mouth, especially when it comes to food addiction per se. But again, for all addictions, you've got to take better care of yourself anyway. Now, when it comes to the mouth, what am I talking about? Is it a very tight, rigid strategy? Absolutely not. What it is instead is you want to be able to look at simple things you can do. Eat whole foods. Eat whole foods mindfully. Now, I have another little covert operation going on. When you do that, you actually change up your gene expression. Who knew that when you ate, for instance, leafy greens, that you're causing changes in your very genes that make you more vulnerable to overeating and addiction? We didn't know this until the advent of the new science of epigenetics. So eat those leafy greens because that will help you with all of this. At the same time, avoiding the hyperpalatables that trigger you in the first place is almost common sense and logical. You can't continuously consume them and expect to be able to continue to progress. You can't. Number one, why would you want that stuff in your mouth in the first place anyway? It's not even food. And the second thing is, the minute you are exposed to the hyperpalatables, you're going to reignite the reward center and start the vicious cycle all over again. So we don't need that. Physical activity is the last M of the mind-mouth muscle. Notice I said physical activity. I didn't say the E word, exercise, so you don't have to break out into hives here. Physical activity simply means assume the vertical more. Use that fantastic body of yours to stay mindful of the fact that you have a body. So many people are so dissociated. And so being mindful, of course, helps you. So mindful movement. The ability to be able to continuously do some form of regularized physical activity, simple walks, clearly do them with other people too. Make them joyful, dance, do things that are fun, but do them on a regular basis. Why? Well, here's the win-win on this one. I told you about epigenetics before. Well, you're going to be able to induce neurogenesis, meaning the creation of more neural or brain circuits that are healthful ones, that are circuits that will help support health and well-being and will supervene over the old circuits that would knee-jerk you to self-destruction. Now, neurogenesis means you're also building a bigger brain. That's right. Research shows that you can actually build a bigger brain, increase brain size. Sign me up for that one. And the bigger the brain, the smarter you are. And I'm really being serious about this. You're actually, if you're taking all of these other elements together, then indeed you'll be at higher, you'll have a greater opportunity to make the right decisions when stresses hit and you have choices to be able to make. At the same time, with neurogenesis, you're also changing up gene expression itself. Just like eating your leafy greens and all the wonderful fruits and vegetables and whole foods change gene expression in the positive, so also does physical movement. And what better physical movement in the world than mind-body physical movement? I'm a yoga fanatic. I love those martial arts. And how about just a walking meditation? All of these help support a strategy that keeps you mindful and on track, vigilant to what you're doing to yourself with every single choice, especially as it relates to food and addiction.
Cool. What do you think the next stages of your work will be? What are the frontiers here?
What I'm doing right now is I'm looking at epigenetics. I'm very, very interested in this, which basically means that as a physician, I'm used to measuring and monitoring people's blood levels of blood sugar and cholesterol and lipids, etc. Well, we still need to do that, don't get me wrong. But now what I'm much more interested in adding to this are epigenetic changes, meaning that by just simply meditating, I can change gene expression within minutes. Wouldn't that be a marvelous motivator for someone to stay connected to their body, to say, by spending 5 minutes or 10 minutes in regularized meditation, I was able to see a change in my very gene expression. When I've mentioned this to my patients, they're wowed. And this takes them to a Star Trek place, where now they can add to their armamentarium of all the other positive affirmations for all the things they're doing to help their health and well-being. Now they add the gene expression piece of this. And this is a level of elegance I can't wait to be able to share with more and more consumers once we're able to find ways to assay this much more easily than we can today, and to take this out in mass market. And then people will be able to utilize this as part of their own strategy. So I am all things epigenetics.
Cool. I have been asking all the people I've interviewed if they were talking to somebody who was starting out in their coaching practice, newly coming onto the scene. What advice would you have for them based on your own work and your own work with coaches and your knowledge of it?
If you're brand new to coaching, you're about ready to enter an extraordinary experience for a lot of reasons. One, the environment now, and that means the healthcare environment especially, is now very, very much open to coaching. We really now see tremendous value in the ability to help guide someone along that trail to their dreams. Very important. We've never had a professional like this before, so you are welcomed with open arms. You'll be part of an integral team to help people with their own health and wellness, whether it be an executive who's trying to perform better but really needs to understand that they have to take care of themselves, mind and body, to do that optimal performance, or whether it's someone in front of you who just simply wants to optimize their own wellness. Period. End of story. Be the best that they can possibly be. You're entering an extraordinary frontier